one of the things that drives me nuts, I think, around the hypertrophy thing is, or building muscle, is a lot of times it gets boiled down too simply, and people talk about this is how you get success, and it's through like things like this particular exercise, right, or this particular workout program, or whatever. And yes, there are workout programs and there are exercises within those workout programs. It's never about what's in the program; it's how it's applied. And so what we're really talking about is like application. And people all have all different goals. And I want to be clear about this. If you're building hypertrophy, then you're likely building strength, right? And if you're building strength, you're likely going to build some level of hypertrophy until you don't. And that is based on the application of what you're doing. And so in kind of high leveling this and breaking it down, like I think there are three key principles that you need to understand about this. So people go, yeah, I've heard that before. But do you know how to apply them is where I want to go with this. So yes, I've heard this before. And, people have talked about that. Oh, we're not inventing anything new. We're not going to give people a science lesson. But there are really three key things that you have to understand and apply in order to build muscle. And there's a lot of nuance and detail that can go into all of that. I'm going to try to not to go into all of that. Like maybe we've gone a little deeper in the past, but there's a few things people want to know or should know if you're in the gym, so that you're not wasting your time and you're actually getting the result that you're looking for. You guys ready?
Ready.
Yeah. All right. So principally, there's when we're talking about muscle hypertrophy, let's talk about muscles and kind of how they work. In order to elicit a growth in muscle tissue, there's kind of three things you need to keep in mind here. First off is tension, mechanical tension. So how do you apply mechanical tension? Well, that's why you go to the gym, because we got we got the barbells and the dumbbells and the cables and tubing and apparatus that you can hang from and pull on and push on and leg press on and all that kind of stuff. Yes, those things that you can apply force to will create tension. But the oversimplification is when people look at that and go, yeah, I just need to use more weight, right? Or I just need to use weight or load, right? Which we'll get into in a second here. But they think that like if I want to grow more muscle, I have to use more weight. That's not what I'm talking about here. We're talking about tension.
I love, there's a quote that I don't know who said it, but of muscles don't know load, they know tension, they know mechanical tension. And so like even comparing exercises, people will want to compare loads of a varying exercise when really like it's a lot more in the nuance of like playing with lever arms, playing with the tension, playing with your application of that tension, if it's through the right tissue, all that different stuff, not just are you adding more weight every week. That's not necessarily the basic principle of it. So
it's the intention as well, as far as how you're going through certain movement patterns with those loads.
Yes, the intention of the tension. I love it. Yeah.
So the first thing is creating that mechanical tension. There's many ways to do that, and it goes beyond load. But one of the things that you need to understand when you're creating tension and however you're doing it is load management while you're creating that tension. And we'll get into some detail here of what elicits what we know basically through science and experience, and whether it's anecdotal or proven on, in studies or in a laboratory, so to speak. Like load management is very important here. And so, yes, you need to use enough weight in order to elicit that response that you're looking for, which again, is muscle growth in this case, right? Which will, if you're doing that, you're also going to be building strength, right? But how you apply that. And there are some specifics here in terms of how much weight you need to use within that tension in order to create this. So I just want to be clear about load management. The load management is much more than just about adding more weight to the bar or adding, grabbing that heavier set of dumbbells. So that's the second thing, is the load management. And then the third thing is the recovery from the work that you're actually putting in. Now, and if your goal is muscle hypertrophy, then managing those things with regard to the loads and the tension that you're putting on, that's where things actually get a little bit more detailed in terms of what your body needs in order to recover from the stimulus that you're giving it, in order so that it can basically recover beyond where you started with it. So that could mean from workout to workout, from week to week, from month to month, from year to year, however you want to look at it. And there's a lot of things that go into that, but those are your three key principles. Again, so it's mechanical tension, it's load management, and it's the recovery process or the management of that recovery. And again, people are like, yeah. I've heard this before. I know this. Yeah, but are you doing that? So I open this up with, here's the reasons why you're not building muscle or you're not going to build muscle. And they're all going to be rooted. Any lack of success that you're having are rooted in one of those three things or all of those things, depending on kind of where you're coming into this. So just going back to the mechanical tension piece, like again, like people choose exercises to create tension. And there's a lot of emotion and things that are attached to a lot of exercises to create that tension. And I think that's where we start with, which is like, what are you choosing to create this tension as it relates to also managing those other two principles that we are trying not to violate here? You can't. And well, if you do, then you're not going to build the muscle that you want. So, and there could be some other deeper rooted things there, but we're not going to get into that too deep into that today. But when we're looking at that mechanical tension, you just mentioned it, muscles don't know loads, they know tension, right? So that sounds like semantics. What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, here's a really good example of when you change, and knowing biomechanics and lever arms and moment arms and how those things vary based on where you're loading a movement and based on even the movement where the load is in space in that current range of motion of the movement too. So a good example is doing like an exercise like a good morning versus like a stiff leg deadlift, right? Where people a lot of times will want to correlate loads of the stiff leg deadlift, right? Or a Romanian deadlift. And then they apply that to their good morning when really you could be doing a great deal less literal weight on the good morning, but because it is a longer lever arm to your hamstrings, you could get just an effective stimulus on your hamstrings with a lighter load. So that's an example of like how you're manipulating these things, how you're manipulating your leverages. And that goes a lot into like technique as well. Another good example is like someone doing like a bicep curl. A really common compensation in a bicep curl is when they're trying to pull into flexion, when they're trying to pull the dumbbell from point A to point B, a lot of people will dip their elbow back and they'll shorten that moment arm when they're pulling. And even though that could be a heavier load you did than last week you did the 20s with the elbow in a good position where you're keeping that long arm. If you shorten that, even though you now are doing the 30s, you're not getting an overstimulus there. You're getting either a net neutral stimulus or might be a net negative stimulus, even though that weight is heavier than it was last week.
So you've sacrificed mechanical tension for loading.
Exactly.
Right? And that's, I think it's probably one of the largest mistakes you see a lot of people making.